Known for his cool, confident demeanor, Nicholson wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of Traoré's words, a powerful connection between generations and continents. The lights of the studio burned bright, yet Jack Nicholson sat unusually still. The program was meant to be routine, a tribute to cinema legends, but no one expected President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso to appear as a guest speaker. The young leader walked in with calm determination, his presence filling the room. Jack adjusted his glasses, half smiling as the crowd applauded. He had seen it all. Fame, fortune, applause. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. Then Traoré locked eyes with him. There was no script, no rehearsed lines, only silence at first. Nicholson felt a chill, something deep stirring that he hadn't felt in decades. "Mr. Nicholson," Traoré began softly, "tonight is not about your fame." The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in. Nicholson swallowed hard, his trademark grin fading. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure he could keep control. Traoré spoke with a quiet strength that commanded the entire room. "You have given the world unforgettable stories," he said, his accent rich and steady. "But I want to speak about the man behind the roles, the one who carried pain yet still gave joy to millions." Nicholson blinked rapidly, as if fighting something he didn't want the cameras to see. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the shift. Even the strongest must allow themselves to feel. "You taught us that not with words, but with your soul on screen." The air thickened with emotion. Crew members behind the cameras wiped their eyes discreetly. Nicholson exhaled slowly, his hands trembling against the armrest of his chair. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. Trott didn't rush him. He simply placed a hand over his heart and said, "Tonight, I honor you. Not the legend, but the man." The words struck like a wave. Nicholson's lips quivered. The grin was gone. The audience could almost hear Nicholson's heartbeat. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees, his shoulders heavy. His trademark coolness had slipped away, leaving behind a man stripped of defenses. Nicholson started, but his voice cracked. He paused, clearing his throat, yet the emotion wouldn't let him continue. Traoré nodded gently, his eyes kind and unwavering. "It's all right, Jack. The strongest hearts are the ones that know when to feel." The tear became 2, then 3, and Nicholson lowered his head, unable to hide them. For once, the man who had been untouchable was human, vulnerable, and painfully real. The cameras captured it all. A moment the world would never forget. And yet, this was only the beginning. The studio lights seemed dimmer now, though no one had touched the switches. All eyes were fixed on Nicholson, his silence heavier than any speech he had ever given on screen. He finally lifted his head, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Why? Why me?" Traoré leaned slightly forward, his calm voice carrying across the room. "Because the world often forgets that even legends are human, and sometimes those who gave us strength need to be reminded of their own." Nicholson blinked, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. For a man known for his sharp tongue, this was an entirely new role, one he hadn't rehearsed. The audience sat in awe, their breaths shallow. Even the cameras seemed hesitant to intrude too closely on the rawness of the moment. Nicholson ran a trembling hand across his face, as though wiping away more than tears. And for the first time in decades, Jack Nicholson felt seen. Trott's voice carried a warmth that seemed to reach into the very core of Nicholson's. "But I know that behind courage is often pain. You carried it so the world could believe in hope." Nicholson's eyes darted down, and suddenly the memories came flooding back. Nights of loneliness. Despite fame losses, he had buried deep moments where the applause couldn't fill the silence of an empty room. He swallowed hard, his hands clasped tightly together. Traoré continued, "My people look at men like you and believe greatness is untouchable, but I want them to know, even the greatest have scars. That's what makes their stories real." The words landed with a force Nicholson couldn't resist. He felt the weight of decades pressing against his chest. Yet strangely, he also felt relief. Someone finally understood. A single tear rolled down his cheek. And this time, he didn't wipe it away. He let the world see it. The audience was utterly silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the sound crew sat frozen, their headsets forgotten. Nicholson finally found his voice low and trembling. "You don't know me yet. It feels like you do. Sometimes the eyes say what words never can." The two men, separated by continents, generations, and worlds apart in upbringing, sat facing each other like lifelong friends. Nicholson exhaled deeply, his usual armor stripped away. "I thought I was past feeling this way," he admitted, "and that is your greatest gift to us all. Not your fame, but your humanity." The room filled with quiet sniffles. Even viewers watching through the cameras thousands of miles away would later admit they cried at this exact moment. Nicholson's eyes glistened again, but this time his tears carried something more. Not just sorrow, but gratitude. Nicholson sat back in his chair, his breathing heavy, his usually sharp eyes clouded with emotion. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing the lines on his face that now looked less like wrinkles and more like scars of a long journey. Traoré paused, letting the silence speak. Then softly he said, "Mr. Nicholson, the strength you showed on screen, millions clung to it. But today, I honor the man behind the legend." The words landed with a force Nicholson couldn't dodge. His lips trembled as he tried to hold himself together, but the fight was already lost. He lowered his gaze, eyes filling with tears. In the audience, some covered their mouths, stunned to witness a man so untouchable brought to such raw vulnerability. Nicholson whispered almost to himself, "I thought I'd run out of tears." Traoré leaned forward gently. "Sometimes tears are not weakness, but proof you've lived fully." And this time, he didn't stop it. The room, heavy with emotion, seemed to breathe with him. For a moment, Nicholson stared at his trembling hands as though weighing whether to speak. Then his growly voice broke the silence. "I've spent a lifetime pretending I was fine," he admitted. "Fame, applause, it fills a room, but not the heart." The confession shocked everyone. This was Jack Nicholson, Hollywood's untouchable giant. Admitting to emptiness, Traoré nodded slowly. "And yet, in admitting it, you've given millions the courage to admit their own." Nicholson looked up, his eyes locking with Traoré's. Nicholson said with a shaky chuckle, "And yet you speak like you've lived 100 years. Traoré smiled softly. "I've seen my people suffer. It teaches you to value truth more than comfort." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Nicholson inhaled deeply. "You don't know what you've done for me today." The moment was too powerful to contain. Someone in the audience began to clap softly, and within seconds, the entire studio was on its feet. The applause was thunderous yet strangely respectful, not the kind meant for entertainment, but for truth. Nicholson's eyes widened, stunned. He shook his head, whispering, "No, no, I don't deserve this." Traoré placed a hand gently on the table between them. "You do not for being perfect, but for being real." The cameras captured Nicholson's rare vulnerability. The tough man, the icon, sitting with tears running freely down his face as the world applauded his humanity. Nicholson slowly rose to his feet, wiping his face, and gave a small, humble nod to the audience. His voice cracked as he said, "Thank you." And though he said nothing more, silence once again said it all. As the applause finally settled, the host leaned in, her voice soft but trembling with curiosity. "Mr. Nicholson," she asked gently, "what are you feeling right now?" Nicholson took a shaky breath, looking from the host to Traoré. His voice was rough, breaking as he answered, "I feel seen for the first time in a long, long while." The words struck the audience like lightning. Viewers watching at home later admitted they froze, afraid to even blink. Traoré didn't interrupt, he just nodded, his eyes filled with the kind of compassion one rarely sees in politics. Nicholson continued, "I spent years thinking toughness meant never letting them see you cry, but maybe real toughness is this." He gestured to the tears still glistening on his face. The room went silent again. People weren't just watching a Hollywood legend, they were watching a man rediscover himself. When it was finally his turn to speak again, Traoré leaned closer, his voice steady but heavy with feeling. "Mr. Nicholson," he began, "in my country, many men are told not to cry too, but I tell them a dry eye can hide a broken heart." The room shivered with the weight of his words. Nicholson's eyes locked onto him, as though those words were written just for him. Traoré continued, "I have seen mothers bury children, and children bury fathers. They cry not because they are weak, but because their love is stronger than their silence. Nicholson's lips trembled again. He whispered, "You're teaching me something I should have known long ago." Traoré smiled faintly. "It's never too late to learn truth, and it's never too late to heal." The audience was stunned. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just complete silence, broken only by the sound of Nicholson quietly exhaling, as though a burden had finally lifted. Then came the moment no one expected. Nicholson slowly rose from his seat. His hand shook, but there was a determination in his steps. Traoré stood too, instinctively meeting him halfway. Without a word, Nicholson pulled him into a tight embrace. The crowd gasped, then immediately fell into a hush as the camera zoomed in. Nicholson's voice cracked as he whispered into Traoré's ear, the microphones barely catching the words, "Thank you for giving me back a piece of myself." Traoré's hand patted his back firmly. "No, thank you for showing the world that even legends can feel." Tears streamed down Nicholson's face now, unashamed and unhidden. The audience, deeply moved, rose to their feet once again in a standing ovation, many wiping their own tears. In that embrace, 2 generations, 2 continents, and 2 very different lives had met in the most human of ways through truth, vulnerability, and love. The moment would live forever. The embrace lingered longer than anyone expected. When Nicholson finally stepped back, his face was wet with tears, but his eyes carried a brightness that hadn't been there before. The host, visibly moved herself, hesitated before asking, "President Traoré, what made you decide to give this tribute today?" Traoré looked around the studio, then back at Nicholson. "Because the world needs to see that dignity and humanity do not depend on age, wealth, or fame. They depend on the courage to feel." Nicholson lowered his head, struggling to steady his breath. The audience was motionless. You could almost hear the sound of hearts breaking and healing at the same time. In living rooms across the world, people sat on the edges of their seats, some whispering prayers, others already wiping away tears. Nicholson finally raised his head. His voice cracked. "You've reminded me of something I lost in the noise of fame, and I'll never forget this moment." The studio erupted in applause again, but many clapped through their own tears. Then Traoré did something no one expected. He told a personal story. "When I was a boy," he began softly, "my father would walk miles every day just to bring food home. He had calloused hands and tired eyes. But when he held me, I felt the safest in the world." Nicholson's face softened. His eyes fixed on Traoré, as if every word was pulling him deeper into his own memories. "One evening," Traoré continued, "he told me, 'Son, strength is not how hard you fight, but how much love you can carry in your heart.' He passed away soon after, but those words, they built the man I am today." Nicholson's lips trembled. He whispered, "My father, he told me almost the same thing, but I was too young, too proud to understand back then." The audience was transfixed. Strangers held hands. Even the camera crew wiped their eyes, struggling to stay focused. It was no longer just an interview. It was a shared confession of love, loss, and lessons across generations. Nicholson leaned forward, his voice breaking as he spoke. "You know, I've played a lot of roles in my life. Gangsters, fighters, men who never cry. But right now, I feel more human than I ever did in all those roles combined." Traoré placed a hand on Nicholson's shoulder. "Because you're not playing a role now, you're being yourself, and that is the greatest courage of all." The audience gasped softly, not out of shock, but because the truth of those words pierced through every heart in the room. Nicholson closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "I wish my father could see me like this, just as his son, not as some untouchable legend." Traoré's voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of sincerity. "He does see you, and tonight, so does the world." At that moment, a hush fell over the studio. Even the air felt heavy, as if time itself had paused to honor the raw honesty unfolding before their eyes. For the first time in decades, Jack Nicholson wasn't just a Hollywood icon. He was a man, vulnerable, broken, yet beautifully whole. The lights in the studio seemed softer now, as though even they were moved by what had unfolded. Jack Nicholson, usually the man with the unshakable smirk, sat quietly, hands trembling slightly. Traoré leaned in gently. "Mr. Nicholson, you've given the world so much tonight. Let the world give something back. The reminder that you are loved, not for the roles you played, but for the life you've lived." Nicholson exhaled shakily, his chest rising and falling as if he were carrying the weight of decades. He tried to speak, but his lips quivered. Instead, he reached out and took Traoré's hand firmly. The audience burst into applause, though many clapped with tear-streaked faces. People watching from home felt as though they were part of something far bigger than a broadcast, something deeply human. For once, Nicholson didn't try to hide. He wiped his tears openly, letting the world see him as just a man, fragile, grateful, and profoundly moved. The applause faded into a silence so deep it seemed to echo. Traoré didn't rush to speak. He simply let Nicholson gather himself. The two men from worlds so far apart sat side by side like old friends. Finally, Nicholson whispered, "You remind me of my father. He believed in people, even when the world didn't." Traoré nodded slowly. "Then his spirit is alive in you. Tonight proves it." A woman in the audience suddenly stood and began clapping again, her voice breaking as she cried, "Thank you." Soon the entire studio rose to their feet. Nicholson covered his mouth, overwhelmed. Traoré bowed his head humbly, but his eyes shone with strength. Those watching at home from America to Africa, Europe to Asia, shared in the silence that followed. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred, a silence heavy with gratitude, respect, and the shared understanding that humanity is strongest when hearts are open. Nicholson whispered again, barely audible, "I'll never forget this night." As the show neared its close, the host finally spoke. "Tonight, we witnessed more than an interview. We witnessed truth." Nicholson turned toward Traoré, his voice steady at last. "You've given me something priceless, hope, and a reminder that love, respect, and courage never age." Traoré smiled gently. "And you've given the world an example of humility and grace that is a gift future generations will carry." The two men embraced once more. The audience wept openly, some whispering prayers, others holding strangers' hands. Across the globe, countless viewers sat in front of their screens, speechless with tears streaming down their cheeks. As the camera zoomed out, Nicholson looked into the lens, his voice breaking one final time. "Never be afraid to feel. It's the bravest thing we can do." The screen faded to black, but the moment stayed alive in millions of hearts. My dear viewers, if this story touched you, don't just leave quietly. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us how this moment made you feel. Your voice matters here, and together we can keep spreading love, hope, and humanity.